Our firm handles all sorts of transactional and litigation matters, both on the commercial and on the residential side. And before COVID, frankly, short-term rentals were one of the hottest topics, and they're starting to get pretty hot again and remain hot. And one of the things that Maggie brought up was HOA documents and CCNRs and deed restrictions. And I want to make this point very, very clear. It is extremely important to get those documents for your clients or have your clients review those documents, particularly if there is any consideration that they may use the property for a short-term rental. Even if the property is not situated in an HOA, let's say there is no HOA, but there are deed restrictions. Well, we see people all of the time trying to enforce deed restrictions against somebody doing a short-term rental. So just because there is no HOA or the HOA is not doing anything, a deed restriction is there and can prohibit you from doing a short-term rental. It can impede you from doing a short-term rental. And so your clients really need to look at this language in these deed restrictions, in the HOA documents, in the CCNRs. And what I would recommend is you having an email to them pretty early on that says, hey, if there is any possibility that you're going to use this as a short-term rental, there are some title related documents that you need. I can get those pretty quickly from Maggie or Nancy, and do a scrubbing job of those documents. Because one of the issues that sometimes comes up is in a lot of deed restrictions. Again, let's say we don't even have an HOA. In deed restrictions, there may be a restriction or a prohibition on short-term rentals. There may be a restriction on conducting business out in your home. And what some neighbors will do is they will try to push the issue of conducting business, or they'll say that this use is inconsistent with what it means to have a single family home. And so you really, really need to be careful about what is in those deed restrictions. And again, certainly HOA documents and HOAs can govern in short-term rental, in the short-term rental world, but deed restrictions can bite people as well. And so I just, piggybacking off of what Maggie said, get those early, get those often, and make sure your clients at least know that they ought to read those. Whether they read them or not, that's on them. But they ought to consider reading them. Now, a couple of you asked me for a couple of quick legal updates, and I usually do provide a quick legal update on some of the stuff we're seeing. We're certainly seeing a lot of land sales and a lot of land transactions. If anybody needs a land checklist, some of the things to look for in a land deal, certainly feel free to shoot me an email. We've got those, but land seems to be pretty popular. And what we're running into are a lot of people who aren't conducting appropriate due diligence to buy land. They go and buy land and then they say, well, I can't build on it. I didn't know that there might be a restriction. I didn't know that I had to comply with zoning. I didn't know that I should have got a survey. I didn't know that there could have been an environmental issue that I could have looked into before finding out that I can't build here. So land is hot. Commission disputes are hot. A lot of procuring cause stuff right now. People going after commissions because there's a little limited inventory. We have the foreclosure moratorium coming up at the end of June, that expires at the end of June. We'll see what happens there. But the big one is the eviction moratorium. And the eviction moratorium, as of right now, as of 10:48 on the 24th of March, 2021, we have the eviction moratorium, the CDC moratorium, that is set to expire in 1 week from now. Okay. The CDC moratorium has been the subject of a lot of litigation recently, particularly in the federal courts. You may have seen that the Texas court came out and said the CDC moratorium is unconstitutional. And that doesn't mean it's unconstitutional in Arizona. It's probably limited to that district, that federal district in Texas. But hey, if you're a landlord, you might want to start piggybacking on some of those other cases and perhaps bringing them in Arizona if it's that important to you. But under the CDC moratorium, if somebody signs a CDC affidavit, a hardship affidavit stating that they're likely to be homeless, et cetera, if they're evicted, then you can't evict. And so we've come up with lists and things that landlords and property managers can do. there's about 6 or 7 things. We have cash for keys, requesting other forms of payment. I've literally seen people paying with gift cards, asking folks to voluntarily relocate, getting promissory notes or guarantees, those types of things. We're seeing them. They're quite common. And you can evict for non-monetary reasons. Pets, damages, unauthorized occupants. So we're seeing those. We're also seeing some evictions based on non-renewals. And so somebody's a holdover tenant or a holdover trespasser, essentially. And those folks are being able to be successful in getting, or landlords in those situations are successful in getting those folks out. But for the most part, landlords have been pretty stymied. And so right now, we don't know whether the CDC is going to extend that emergency moratorium. We don't know if they're going to come out with new conditions. They usually wait until the last minute, like they did last time, to extend. And so perhaps this week we'll have a little bit more news and a little bit more to report. But as of right now, it's set to expire. And frankly, we don't know what's supposed to happen, the procedures for actually going through with an eviction at that point. Under the CARES Act, you had to give a 30-day notice. Under the CDC moratorium, there's nothing. It doesn't say anything about what's supposed to happen next, whether you give them a 5-day notice, whether you give them a 30-day notice. So we're going to put out some opinions on what needs to happen in those situations, unless it's extended. So we'll get that to you if you need it. But those are the real hot button topics that we're seeing right now. The eviction moratorium set to expire next week, uptick in commission disputes or procuring cause suits, and then the foreclosure moratorium. Now on to short-term rentals. I want to paint a little bit of history or a little bit of a timeline so that we can see where things actually stand now. Early 2020, before the declaration of a pandemic and all that stuff, we had 2 pieces of state legislation, and those were aimed at short-term rentals. And Maggie and Nancy were great about getting information about that. We had a whole big panel discussion. We had people who were happy with new legislation. We had people opposed to the new legislation. But we had Senate Bill 1554 and House Bill 2875. And again, these are from 2020, early 2020. Senate Bill 1554 would have basically said, look, you can have 1 short-term rental every 30 days. It would have given authority for local rules. So Town of Paradise Valley could come up with their own set of rules and basically prohibit short-term rentals if they really wanted to. That Senate bill did not pass. And as to the House bill, that also did not pass. House Bill 2875 also gave authority to the local authorities, local municipalities, towns, and cities. And that would have required the posting of certain notices, noise monitoring devices, a certain taxation scheme. That didn't pass as well. So as it currently stands at this very moment, cities, towns, municipalities can't do much, okay? They can request or regulate in the health and safety realm, and they can require contact information. But at this very moment, there's no law that says cities and states can do much, or cities and counties and other municipalities can do much other than regulate for health and safety as of right now. Now that is set to change, and I'm going to get into those changes in a second. And after those bills failed, or weren't passed, we then dealt with the shutdowns and the pandemic. And the 2 big issues that we were dealing with during the pandemic in terms of short-term rentals, at first we were very concerned about the industry, certainly, but then things started shaking themselves out. People started getting a little bit more comfortable. The first issue we had to deal with, though, were cleaning policies. I've mentioned this on a few of these webinars, and we've now seen 3 lawsuits against owners of short-term rentals because they failed to have cleaning policies, or there's an allegation that there was a failure to have cleaning policies, or that these owners failed to stick with their cleaning policies and someone got sick. So someone makes the claim, I stayed at your place for a week, it wasn't clean, I got COVID, and now I'm suing you as the owner because I want my medical bills paid and I want you to pay for my trip or whatever. The unfortunate part is that the courts have allowed those cases to continue. when I first saw and heard about these cases, I said, there's no way these cases are going to be allowed to continue because there's a significant causation issue. How do you show that this property caused you to get ill, or this lack of cleaning in this particular instance caused you to get ill? Well, what happened was we have some highly paid physicians out there who are acting as expert witnesses who basically said it's more likely than not that they've given legal opinions that says it's more likely than not that these folks caught COVID at this place because there weren't proper sanitization, there weren't cleaning policies in place, et cetera. So our recommendation continues to be have a cleaning policy, stick with the cleaning policy. And if you need a sample, we'll certainly get you one. But that's been one issue that we've seen that has come out of out of 2020. Second issue was the cancellation or the refunds, and we've discussed this on prior webinars as well. You need a policy. If there's another government shutdown, if there's another declaration of pandemic or what happened or what have you, you need to make sure you're clear in your agreement as to whether the person who's going to rent your place is entitled to a refund or no refund, or whether they get a credit for future use. All right. And so most people are using the crediting concept that says, look, if you get sick, or if there's a declaration from the governor that says there can't be short-term rentals at the moment, well, then you get to use this in the future. Okay. If you need a cancellation or a refund policy, shoot me an email after this as well, and we can get to that. So again, early on we were dealing with two pieces of legislation. Those went away. We were then dealing with cleaning issues, cleaning policies, and cancellation refunds. Now we are dealing with new legislation that came out at the beginning of 2021. So we're dealing with very, very similar legislation again. Okay, we have Senate Bill. This is the important one. Senate Bill 1379. That has passed. That has made it through the Senate. It now goes to the House, and it will become law. Okay. There may be some minor revisions or edits to it, but it will ultimately become law. And what that does is it sets up a series of fines. It allows cities and municipalities to have a little bit more control to fine hosts who don't register, to fine hosts who allow for party houses, and it's an increasing penalty for each violation. It also allows the state to revoke somebody's transaction privilege tax license if there are three or more, or if there are more than three adjudicated health and safety violations. So you could lose your ability to have a short-term rental altogether. Now, the other part of this is an insurance requirement. So under this new Senate bill, you're going to have insurance or allow the short-term rental guests to procure insurance. Okay, so they found that to be lacking in a lot of these situations. And so that's something you're going to have to do to comply with the statute. So that one's going to become law, I suspect, within the next 4 to 6 weeks. And so now the local municipalities have a little bit more control. There's a new fine schedule, and there's the potential that somebody who's allowing parties to happen can lose their transaction privilege tax and ultimately lose their ability to have a short-term rental. Okay. We also have, this one's a little bit scarier if you own short-term rentals. We also have House Bill 2481 that's been introduced. It hasn't passed yet. It hasn't passed through the House or the Senate yet, but there's the potential that it could. And basically, owners right now, as I mentioned, are currently required usually to provide contact information and register their short-term rentals. Well, this new bill would set up a license. Basically, there'd be a license to have a short-term rental. If we have a license, then that's going to allow for city officials or whoever, it's the municipality or the county or whoever it is, to inspect short-term rentals. It's going to allow them to change zoning designations and make other significant changes that will restrict people's ability to have short-term rentals. It's going to allow cities and municipalities to enforce occupancy limits. And so there's some significant, 2 adults per bedroom kind of a thing that if this passes is going to be in effect. So those are the 2 pieces of legislation that we are now dealing with. One is certainly going to pass and become law, pretty much as I said, in the form as I said, because there haven't been many revisions that have gone through. And then we have House Bill 2481, which has the potential to you know, really impact short-term rental owners. So I always give out some tips, and frankly, I don't really have any tips in terms of what you can do to prevent this new legislation from becoming law. But these are just tips to have a a successful endeavor here. If you're an owner, I always recommend having some sort of separate side agreement that the tenants sign, whether they're booking through a short-term rental site or not. Force them to sign a written side agreement that sort of supersedes whatever they've signed with VRBO or Airbnb. Certainly have policies in place, and if you need samples of these, let me know. Consider having an LLC, have a cleaning policy, and stick to it. And then the big one continues to be insurance as well. So you're going to want to talk to an insurance agent as to the appropriate type and appropriate amount of insurance. And if you do those 5 things, you're usually going to be in pretty good shape. But to avoid some of the horror stories, I see that there's a bunch of chat questions coming through, and so I'll start addressing those. I'll stop the share as well. By the way, if anybody wants any of that stuff that I mentioned, whether it's on the rentals.